Hi, everybody. Welcome to another Clack Tutor Legal Discussion. I'm Shashank Tiwari from NLS Bangalore, and I'm here to continue our previous discussions on criminal law. Now, we did finish part one and part two, and we've understood the basics of a crime, what are the elements of a crime, and looking at what happens after we establish the elements. We see punishments, we see some general defenses. There are ways for accused or defendants to claim that they did not intend to commit the crime or to remove one of the key elements, thereby proving that the crime did not itself happen. Today, we come to part three. Now, we're taking a bigger picture. We're looking at criminal law more holistically. This will help us more for our understanding when we see passages on criminal law. But it's important to also get an idea of what the criminal legal system means. What do you understand when they say criminal justice system or the role of state? So today, let's look at the basic difference between civil law and criminal law. This will help us understand why criminal law brings state into its picture. Now, we discussed this in criminal law 1 as well. Criminal crimes are committed against society at large, whereas in civil law, it's between two parties. They say these terms, rights in personam and rights in rem. We know that contracts create rights in personam. It creates rights between the two contracting parties. In criminal law, what happens is any crime violates entire society's rights. It's like the entire society is affected. Everyone in the society should be affected if one person has been murdered or if one person has been a victim of theft, which is why the state feels it's their responsibility to ensure that crimes against society at large, offenses against everyone in society, need to be curtailed. And if all the people in society are being affected, then one person in society has to represent everybody. That's the role which state takes, which is why in criminal law we see that post the FIR or whatever, the investigation is conducted by the police. The police stands as protectors of society. They ensure that crime is prevented or crime is reduced to as minimal as possible, which is why police conducts investigation. They help in prosecuting these defendants and these accused. Whereas in civil law, it's the parties themselves. The evidence has to be submitted by the lawyers. The own party hires their own lawyer, their own counsel, which then fights the case for them. Except in criminal law, the victim does not have to file evidence or fight the case themselves by hiring their own lawyer. What the victim has to do is initiate a complaint, an FIR, the first information report, as is called. It's one of the most basic pieces of beginning the criminal process. The criminal justice system requires an FIR as the fundamental requirement for any criminal proceeding to begin. Why? Because society at large may be affected, but it's one individual or some individuals of society who have been victims. Until and unless these victims don't come forward, until they don't come out and complain to the police or tell them that this is something that's happening wrongly, the state or the police can't take any action against anybody, which is why this FIR acts as a mode of communication between the victim and the state. And this is important because this is the only way the victim can tell the state that they need help, something is wrong, their rights are being violated. In civil law, it's initiated by a party, they can file a case and a notice is sent. But in criminal law, an FIR with the police is an absolute must. In civil law, only two parties can handle this. The party that feels they're the victim and the party that's the wrongdoer. In criminal law, there is the victim, there is the accused, but there needs to be a state. There needs to be the police. They have to be involved. In criminal law, the appeals itself are filed by the state. Like I said in our previous discussions in part one and part two, the entire criminal battle is between the accused or the defendant and the prosecutor. The prosecutor is a representative of the state, of the government, which is why the victims don't have to go to court themselves and hire their own lawyer. There are procedural codes, the CRPC or the Criminal Procedure Code, which explains why or how the police should do those actions which they do, such as arresting people, arrest warrants, coming to somebody's house for investigation, raids, even possible inquiries, or when they have their supposed, interviews or discussions where they're trying to get information from people. All of these are procedures, and the CRPC provides guidelines so that police doesn't misuse their powers and doesn't misutilize the powers that have been given to them for bringing justice forward. Now, another thing that's very important for us to understand is the concept of proof, the burden of proof and standard of proof. We understood elements of a crime, what these elements are, but how do you prove them? How do you show to the court that yes, these elements have occurred or a crime has happened? So there's two requirements for that. There's the burden and there's a standard. The burden means the responsibility. Whose job is it to show to the court that a crime has been committed? Should the accused go and prove that they have not committed a crime? Or should the prosecutor or the victim or someone else show to the court that, look, a crime has happened? That itself is burden of proof. And the fundamental rule of thumb is that the burden rests on the party making the accusation. So the victim tells police that this and this has happened with me. The police then engages the public prosecutor, the state gets involved, and the public prosecutor must prove to the court that the accused has committed this crime. This is a phrase you see everywhere. Every defendant is presumed innocent until proven guilty, which means even if the police say he has committed a crime, even if the victim says he has committed a crime, even if the public prosecutor says in court that they have committed a crime, the court must assume that they are innocent until they are proven guilty, which means the job of proving them guilty is on the person making the claim that they are guilty. And that is the prosecutor, that is the government, that is the role of the state, which means the burden of proof rests on the prosecutor, on the state. Now, how do they prove that they are guilty? How do they prove that they are guilty and not innocent, which is why they should be put in jail or some punishment needs to be given? There is a standard of proof. The standard in criminal law is what we refer to as a beyond reasonable doubt standard. The court must presume that, or the court must be convinced by the evidence and the arguments submitted by the prosecutor that most definitely it is this person who has committed this crime. And that is proved by the court being convinced beyond reasonable doubt. Now, in civil law, we do know the standard is a balance of probabilities or preponderance of probabilities, as they say, which is more to say that in these circumstances, it seems like, yes, this person has done this. Between the arguments submitted and the possibilities, yet this makes sense. This makes sense the most. That's what we see in civil law. Except in criminal law, the standard is much higher because we're talking about punishments, we're talking about jail, we're talking about possible, death by hanging. So the court must be so convinced that it is not making a mistake. It is beyond a reasonable doubt. And that's the only situation where they will find someone guilty. And another reason for that is because courts have often said it's okay if 10 guilty men walk free, but it's not okay if one innocent man is put behind bars. And the reason for that is to protect the interests of society at large. If the courts did not have a beyond reasonable doubt standard, if they had a simpler standard, let's say preponderance of probabilities or most likely, then that would mean that every second person could be at risk because anyone can file a complaint and the police are obligated to file an FIR, and then the case begins and the person goes to court, and then they might even be put behind bars if the other lawyer is good enough to prove. The court waits for a beyond reasonable doubt standard, and that's important because it helps the innocent men and women not be put behind bars in just because the other lawyer was too good or the evidence showed that maybe this could have happened. But then again, this also brings its own risks. One of the risks is that the accused just has to prove reasonable doubt. Let's say there is a crime and the accused is being, alleged, or the prosecutor is saying that yes, the person was there at the time he committed this crime. He has stabbed this person with his right hand and the knife is here and all of that evidence is there. But then the person says, but I'm not right-handed, I'm left-handed. So it could not have been me. Now, this itself might not seem very convincing, but it does create a possibility of doubt. It creates reasonable doubt. And that itself is enough for the court to, say that, okay, the evidence submitted here does not show beyond reasonable doubt that this person has committed the crime, which is why they would not hold some person guilty. Now, the standard can work in both ways, but for our importance, it's necessary that we get an idea of what the standard of proof is, what is the burden of proof, and whose role it is to establish proof. The role of the state is something we now understand better and see why the criminal justice system is between an accused and the government. You've often seen in case laws, or when you hear of cases, the names are always State of Karnataka versus ABC, you know, Union of India versus XYZ. The reason is because one side is the party who may be the victim, and the other side is the state or the union. The government is the other side. They fight the case on behalf of the victim, on behalf of the society at large. The state is one of the essential parties in a criminal law dispute. In any criminal battle, once again, I repeat, one of the parties has to be the state, because the state is trying to prove the person guilty, not the victim. And the reason for this is because they don't want the victim to be out against the criminal seeking revenge or something of the sort. These are crimes against society. It must be represented or fought by a representative of society. And the government takes that role. The role of the state is that to, through a public prosecutor, it is to ensure that the accused or the defendants who are actually guilty are put behind bars and society is kept safe. That's the understanding in the role of state. I hope Criminal Law Part 3 has brought a better idea of what criminal law is and how the role of the state works. In our first three parts, we have gotten a basic understanding and a good grasp of what the basics of criminal law are that might be important for CLAT. We will have another part 4 that will be about procedure and jurisdiction. For the CLAT exam, these three parts will be extremely helpful, and it's relevant that we keep an idea of all the things that we discussed today. For part 4, we will discuss jurisdiction, and we will also look at, possibly what criminal procedure is like. Until criminal part 4, thank you so much. Stay safe. See you.